All financial support for this podcast comes from my patrons on patreon.com. If you'd like to join in with the patrons, please check out patreon.com/DarwinGrosse. That's DarwinGrosse. Now enjoy the podcast. Okay, today I have an opportunity to speak to somebody that's new to me, although I don't know why, because the kind of work that he does is really something that is like dead on my radar. His name is Ruaridh Law, and he came to me via the Thorsten sideboard, who was like, I was like, hey, do you know somebody that I should be talking to? And this guy came out of his mouth right away. And so that was clearly a sign that I needed to talk to him. And so here we are. So with no further ado, let's talk to Ruaridh. Hey, man, how's it going?
It's good, thanks. Yeah, I'm great. How are you?
All right. I hope I didn't butcher your name too badly.
No, that was pretty much spot on. It usually takes people a good run up to get to it. So I think you hit it pretty much first time. That's good.
Oh, fantastic. Well, excellent. Good for me. That doesn't happen very often. So for people who out there who might not be aware of what you do, and I think, again, sometimes your name isn't always attached to the stuff that you do. So you've been involved in the creation of this Further In kind of virtual festival. You do the Broken 20, and for some reason now it's called Broken 60 label or something. I'd like to hear the story behind that.
Yep.
You released work under the name TVO. And so you actually have sort of like a lot of stuff that you've been doing under different monikers, or maybe not with a lot of, personal pointing at me kind of stuff. So why don't you fill people in on kind of the breadth of different things that represent your body of work?
Of course. So I started off in a band about 20 years ago called the Marsha Blaine School for Girls. It's sort of a very electronica style band with two friends of mine, and we had I suppose what you call small to medium success with that. But branching out from that, I wanted to kind of do things myself. So I moved into the music area by myself as, first of all, the Village Orchestra, and then because somebody pointed out to me that's a terrible name, which is, I take that on the chin. It was a label who wanted to kind of rebrand me because they thought the name was terrible and they didn't want it on the center circle of the vinyl. I can understand that, yeah. So just cut it down to TVO. So since then, yeah, exactly as you say. So I've been releasing records as TVO, and quite a lot of collaborative things as well and performing. But latterly, I've been concentrating more on my label, Broken 20, which also has a spin-off, Broken 60, which we can get to in a bit if you want.
Okay.
So we sort of release not just music, we do DVDs of film and sort of mixed media stuff. We've done prints and sort of newspaper works and things like that. And yeah, at the moment I'm running Further In, which is a streaming channel that's running every 3 days a week, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, which I set up to try and support artists of all disciplines. So not just music. So musicians, DJs, spoken word artists, dancers, anything, you name it. Filmmakers, actually. Filmmakers is the thing that's getting the real interest. And we are 3 days a week screening performances or films or whatever, in order to try and let people who have had their platform taken away from them because of what's going on in the world just now get an opportunity to still show work that maybe they'd produced for festivals or for gigs or tours or whatever. And at the same time, I'm still working on music myself, but I'm also now more working in sound art type stuff. So Be that installation stuff, which I've just finished work on something recently, or some more audio-visual things, or performances that are based around quite specific parameters, as much as normal music now. So yeah, lots of irons in the fire.
Yeah, I noticed that that your work doing installation stuff had started to kind of pop up, but then also this 44 Tarot thing, which you debuted on Further In, it sort of has this, it's one of these things that almost feels like a hybrid, because there's very much a visual and a storytelling component to it. It has the sense of almost being installation-like, except you perform it by using these cards. Could you explain for people a little bit more about that and how that represents sort of like where you're at right now?
For sure, and you're right. It's a perfect summation of all the different things that I'm interested in at the moment. It started off. It started off at the end of last year, where a friend of mine, Sietse van Erve, who's a Dutch musician who runs a record label called Moving Furniture, had asked myself and a couple of other musicians to respond to 44 short pieces of music that he had written specifically for this purpose. So he sent me 44 second long pieces of I would hesitate to call them music actually, pieces of sounds,
right.
and basically wanted to see what I would do with them. And unfortunately, the thing for me is that I go away and the idea always comes first. So I didn't even listen to the sounds. I just went away and started mulling these things over. And as usual, just as I was falling asleep one night, the thought popped into my head that dealing the sounds randomly was rather like dealing cards. And somehow that then escalated into each one being represented by a card, which then, for whatever reason in my head, because the tarot deck has more than 44 cards, of course, it's got 78 cards, but it came in my head that it would be very well represented by tarot cards. So then at this stage, I was just thinking of maybe writing an audio interface that would essentially just shuffle these pieces of audio about. But things grew legs, as they tend to do, and I decided that I would make a tarot deck around them and add the additional sounds myself into the mix to make it up to 78 pieces. And then when I got there, it's like, when you get an idea, you have to see it through to its point of conclusion. So once I had come up with the cards, I thought, well, now I need to have images for them. And then if they're images, well, why shouldn't they be 44 short films, which would then multiplied up to 78 short films? And the whole thing has then escalated into it being a deck of cards, which you use with an interface which a friend and I have built using Arduino and Rolly light blocks, which essentially acts as an interface to read what card it is, and then the computer will respond to what card that is with the audio and the video that correspond to the card. And then how you move your hands around on the interface will change the way that the audio and the video of the cards interact with each other. So originally it was just supposed to be a performance interface for myself, but then the more I thought about it, I showed it to my children, and they're 11 and 7, and they're very interested in things that they can play with and that they can touch and all the rest of it, and they really, really liked it. And I thought, wouldn't this be amazing as a way to get round I'm trying to think of what the right way of putting it is. There's an austerity sometimes about new music interfaces that only the person who's created it can use, right. And there's it's a bit of a closed world. I don't want to show you how it works, and it's only I who can use it. And I thought, wouldn't it be great if my friend who's an improvising musician has just as much of a chance of making something good with this as my 11-year-old does, or in fact maybe the 11-year-old will come up with something better, because the cards, obviously tarot cards, have names associated with them, and those represent archetypes that most people can put in their heads as representing people from their own lives or stories essentially. And the other thing I found was that my boys really liked creating stories with them. They would put down the Knight of Cups, for instance, and he was a knight, and then they would put down the Empress, and so the knight was going to see the Empress, and so on and so on. And these stories that they made together, I thought, wouldn't this be amazing if this was set up as an installation? People would want to interact with the cards just on the basis of being able to make stories with it, and also then being able to make sounds, even if they don't really know how the sounds are happening, but they have complete control over what's going on. So that's a very long-winded way of sort of trying to explain it. But essentially, it's a performance interface which either I or anybody else can use to generate these videos and make the sounds interact with each other.
Sure. Well, one of the things that really drew me into it was that it actually solves a number of problems simultaneously, right? So you do talk about like sort of the austerity of user interfaces for a lot of new music tools. And I think that that's true. And I think that that's hard not only for viewers who are trying to watch it, but also can be a trial for the performer themselves. I know I've started doing this thing with some of my performance interfaces where I'll put visualizers or visual stuff on it simply to occupy my mind, so I don't like freak out during performance and just start being like, oh my God, this has been running too long, I have to switch something out, because you get such a time warp when you're performing that a lot of times you'll be playing something for 4 seconds and in your mind it feels like it's been playing for 4 hours, right?
Yeah.
And so the visuals kind of help draw me away from self-obsession and into like an immersion into the work. But in your case with the 44 Tarot stuff, it also provides this beautiful visual interface for the viewers to watch. And you have these textual like story maps that appear underneath the cards when they're played that sort of it takes like this concept of the individual cards and it kind of expands it so that it draws you into some storytelling in your mind. I kept on finding myself like weaving together, 2 adjacent stories. How would I get from here to there? I mean, it's a brilliant play.
Part of it is slightly cynical, if I'm being honest about it, because when I was sort of working through the ideas in my head, I thought, how do I avoid people coming up? So if it's a setup as an installation, how do I avoid people coming up and just putting down as many cards as they can, as quickly as they can, to sort of work through them all? Oh, I don't like that one. Let's see what they all look like, kind of thing. So, again, with this sort of thing, it's important to try and capture the audience's attention, I think, whether it be the audience of a performance or an audience of a piece of art, because otherwise, exactly like you say, it just becomes sort of slightly self-obsessed. And, I think you should look at this for this X amount of time because, I think it's very important. But that's not how it should be. It should be that it's capturing people's imagination.
Right.
The root of everything that I've tried to do, certainly in the last maybe 10 years or so, is you've got to be able to, for me, and this is not me being absolutist about it, but for me, you've got to be able to sense the humanity underneath anything. So I can listen to very, very abstract, very obviously computer music, if you like, and some I like and some I won't. And if I try to explain to people why it is, if I can hear the spirit or the soul of the music inside there, if I can hear what the composer is actually doing, what their input into it is, then I can take something from it. And if I can't, then that leaves me cold. And it's the same if I walk into a room and there's an installation on, which is, maybe a very abstract film work. If it doesn't grab me and if I don't feel that I am connecting somehow with the artist, then I'm probably not going to spend that much time with it. And so it's important to me that I try and make sure that the audience is engaged. I think I have a responsibility to do that. And I know that obviously some performers and musicians and artists don't feel that. They feel that the work stands by itself and people either, they like it or they don't. But I don't think that I could work that way. I've got to feel that there's a connection there.
Sure. Well, I don't know. It's hard for me to consider wanting to be a performing artist and not be concerned about the people you're performing for. But hey, to each their own.
Yeah, exactly.
So one of the things I like doing on my podcast is talking to people about their background and how they got to be the artists that they are. Sure. And especially with it seems like not only that you work on many different kinds of artwork, but you sort of just love all kinds of artwork as well. And so I'm curious about where you're coming from, what your background is, and how you got, what were the influences that turned you into the person with the kind of interests and the kind of artistic expression that you have?
Sure. I mean, I really like the way that you put that. Because again, sometimes people will say to me, "Oh, how do you manage to run a label?" And the answer is, I just love. I love things that I love. I get very, very passionate about things, very excited about things. If somebody sends me something that I wasn't expecting, when we're streaming on the streaming channel today, somebody just messaged me I'd never met, no connection with, out the blue, and said, "Hey, I have all these hacked Sega Genesis cartridges that I've made into films," and I watched it. And instantly I was like, this needs to be out there. We need to be doing something with it. I get so excited about it. And I consume is maybe the wrong word because it has negative connotations, but I like to absorb. Maybe that's a better one. Anything that tickles my brain, that's the key thing. As long as it makes me feel something or think something, then it doesn't really matter what it is. I get very, very excited about it. And that's been the case since I was young. So, I mean, I had a relatively musical education. I played in a concert band and studied music, but just at a high school level. I still remember, and that I suppose that was mostly because that was the sort of thing that was expected if you were a reasonably well-achieving student, that you would probably show an interest in something creative. So I wouldn't say that I was doing it at that point because I loved it. But I do remember studying music in high school, and my friend and I sitting in a class, and we had the head of the music department was very, very conventional, very, very much enjoyed. It was very big on the Romantic period and the Baroque period of classical music.
Sure.
But he had to cover, as part of the curriculum, he had to cover all areas of music. And I still remember very vividly him saying, we're going to cover this section now on 20th century composition. And to be honest, I think it's all a load of rubbish, and I'm going to skim over it as quickly as possible. But, I still need to do it. And the very first thing that he played was Steve Reich's Music for Pieces of Wood. And then he also played some Stockhausen and Schoenberg and various, like a greatest hits of the 20th century composition, if you like. And around us, people were literally kind of outwardly making noises of how much they hated it all. My friend and I just looked at each other as if to say, "Yeah, this is this is the good stuff. This is what we like." So when I went to university, I got into clubbing, as obviously most people who go to university go through a stage at that point. And at that stage, it was the mid-90s in Scotland. It was a very vibrant time to be into music and that kind of thing. I met a lot of people at university who were more into music, including a guy called Dave, who's the guy that I run the label with and the streaming channel with, and is sort of my longest musical collaborator, stroke sparring partner, stroke inspiration. And he and I would go to techno nights and nights that would put on more odd experimental electronic music. So we'd see things like Panasonic, quite early in my life, which for somebody who liked going to clubs and listening to techno, it really wasn't that hard for me to draw a very, very strong line between Panasonic and that kind of thing. And also then sort of weirder electronic stuff like Zoviet France, who were a huge, huge inspiration on me, and Coil and that kind of industrial sort of thing. And then as time went on, I just stayed loving all music from all those kind of different electronic areas, as well as the sort of post-rock and that kind of thing that was going on. And that's basically been it. Alongside all those other things, there's a very good art. What's the right word? I wouldn't say community, but there are a lot of good galleries in Scotland, and it's very easy to see really interesting new modern art, and that was also something that grabbed my brain. So as I've gone on, it's just been something that I've continued to kind of try and absorb. I still buy music every week from all sorts of areas. I still I listen to every single demo that we get sent with the label. I just try and absorb as much as possible because I still get excited about it. I think that's when I know that I'm a grown-up, when I reach the stage of not being excited by this stuff anymore.
Right. Well, let's hope you never grow up then.
Exactly. Yeah.
So one question is, you get excited by, everything from techno clubbing to Zoviet France, but how did that translate into you doing music? It's there's a gap there that a lot of people never bridge.
Yeah.
Which is going from enjoying it to making it. What was the swing for you?
It's hard to say because I started writing music when I was still at high school with the friend who we were listening to 20th century composition with. Mm-hmm. And we did that as much out of a camaraderie kind of thing. It was almost as much about, it was a way of friends spending time with each other doing fun things. Sure. And as we added the third person to the group, which was the guy that I met at university, it became as much about that. So I'm trying not to do it down, but it was musical expression was probably only 50% of the equation, whereas having fun with my friends was the other 50%.
Social interaction, right? Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. But then I definitely I think the problem is my brain is constantly filled with ideas, most of which are stupid or impractical or are never going to happen. But even at that stage, the reason why I started to do my own thing, which was still while I was working with those two, was because my brain was filled with more ideas than I was able to realize within the confines of doing that. And actually, as I've gone on for the next 20 years, then that is basically what it is. I will have ideas and I will try and realize them. And if that means that it's setting up a label, that's one thing, or setting up a streaming channel, that's one thing. Or if I think I would really like to take right-wing websites and turn them into something meaningful, which is an idea that I had about 2 years ago. And then I thought, well, do you know what? I'm just going to go and do it. That's basically what it is. So it's the ideas come before any kind of musical expression, but the creative impulse is always there first, for sure.
Yeah, well, I know from reading reading some interviews about you, the extent to which the idea coming first is often kind of influenced also by external work, particularly writing. So you talk about like the thing where you did an installation based off of sort of like trying to make something not horrible out of Breitbart articles, right?
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, but also, you did the Red Knight series, which is Red Knight and Red Knight Variations, which are based off of. It's funny because I'm a huge Burroughs fan, but I stopped just before the Red Knight series.
Oh no!
So I might have to go back and crack those open because. But anyway, you kind of were influenced by that writing. You did the one piece that was We Can Remember It For You Wholesale, which was based off of a Philip K. Dick story. It's clear that that these influences are really a deep part of what compels you to make a piece, right?
Yeah, and I mean, it's a difficult thing to talk about without sounding very pretentious. And actually, it's as far. I need to be honest. Actually, the Scottish psyche is very much based around not being pretentious and actually having a fear of coming across as such. And that's why I try very hard to root things in, as down to earth concepts as I can, because I'm terrified of my peers, my invisible peers, wherever they are, the rest of the Scottish population that are standing over me saying, no, what
who do you think you are, right?
Exactly. But I suppose the easiest way to say it is I just like to link ideas in my head. So, as a random example, because you've mentioned it, We Can Remember It For You Wholesale. I was approached by an arts group who said, we have this idea for an installation, but we want to perform it live. We'd love you to come and do the live music element of it. And the idea behind it was that they wanted to compare and contrast actual memory with, which at this point, so it was about 10, 15 years ago, so it was a lot less prevalent, the idea of digital memory, and that people consider their own memory to be better than the contents of memory sticks. But actually, from a practical point of view, our memories change over time, but right. Memory sticks or whatever don't. And immediately when they said that, that set my brain going. And the first thing I thought of was about various different aspects of memory. And funnily enough, I've since done, I think, 2 more things all based around memory. I'm slightly obsessed with the idea of it, with how it's locked in, but how it changes over time. And that just seemed to me to be a natural leap onto something else that I'd read, which in this case, it was the Philip K. Dick story, but also lots of other things that I drew in. So it's just, I think being honest about your influences and being honest about where the ideas come from is really important, rather than saying, I'm a visionary who comes up with everything completely from scratch. It's a good thing to say, no, these are the things that have inspired and influenced me, and to be honest about it, but to draw them together. That's the most important thing, the drawing together. And that means that my rule is, if I can relate to it, then other people should be able to relate to it too, because I'm not a unique, special snowflake that, only I have these ideas. It's all a cultural stew to kind of draw from, and that's basically what the idea is.
Sure, but I think that there's 2 pieces there. First of all, I think it's really powerful to be open about your influences, if for no other reason than it gives people who are introduced to your work and might be drawn into it, it gives them someplace to explore. I think that, now we have the opportunity to look up at anything in the world, right? It's funny because in researching the Red Knight series, I was like, oh, I that is a part of Burroughs' writing that I didn't know anything about. So I go to Wikipedia, and the Wikipedia article on William S. Burroughs is like better than any biography I ever read, right?
Yes.
And it's just
Yeah.
like there, all you have to do is type his name into a browser, right? There's
Yeah.
so much detail available to us, but finding trails to get to interesting information, it's hard to know where do I go when I have infinite possibilities of paths. How do I know which path to take? So I think that what you do by talking about those influences is give people the opportunity to search out those paths, right?
Yeah, I actually think that's a really good way of looking at it. I remember when I was 18, 19, and the internet wasn't a thing at all really
Right.
when I was 18 or 19, and I used to get there was a book distributor in Scotland called AK Press, and they would publish this 40 or 50 page photocopied sheet of all the books that they would import from all over the world, and it would be things like City Lights and Lumpanics and research and all these different
Mm,
things.
right.
And I used to scour them and, would spend my very, very limited funds on sort of picking out different ones. And it would be also, these are the sort of things that introduced me to everything from Burroughs to Throbbing Gristle to Gilbert and George to, the list is just absolutely endless. And it's funny because now, like right here in the here and now, I think it's just as difficult, exactly as you say, to find the genuinely interesting stuff because it's the exact opposite. So instead of it being these tiny islands of interest that you have to seek out and find, now there's information everywhere, and finding the right path to it is definitely difficult.
Well, the other thing though that I like that's interesting is as a listener. So when I'm listening to something like We Can Remember It For You Wholesale, I'm able to like it gives me sort of like brain candy to work with. Like you talked about being like driven by anything that tickles your brain. Having sort of like this connection to a literary work, and also I had read about this having relationships to talking with your parents and others. It gave me the opportunity to just really engage my whole brain as I was listening to the piece. It was a wonderful way to interact with your music.
Wow, that's not a take on it that I've heard before, and I actually I like that. That's I suppose it shows that it's worked, right, from my point of view.
Sure, right. That's awesome. So, one of the things I wanted to ask you about is, kind of as an extension, then is your label running because your work is very uniquely your own voice and your own vision, and it's sort of you talk about having a ton of ideas and wanting to run them out to their basically to their full course. How does that put you in a position to also help curate and work with other people's work? It seems like almost the extent to which your ideas occupy your mind would make it difficult to, I don't know, to be open to other people's work.
Yes, I mean you're right in a sense, and that's why I run a label with two other people. So
Okay, all right.
one of the great things about Dave, who's the guy that I've worked with
What's
for a
Dave's
very long time,
what's Dave's last name?
Donnelly.
Okay.
So he records as production unit, and
Oh, got
he
it.
set up the label with me in the first place. So he is the grounding part of this. He is good at toning down the wilder ideas sometimes,
Okay.
having more of a rational way of looking at things, I would say. And that's definitely, in terms of the label, that's why he has been very, very helpful because he is able to look at things with a bit of a broader eye. For releasing things on the label that are my things, I like to run them past him first because otherwise it can become quite dictatorial.
Sure.
Like no, I'm using up all the funds to put out the quadruple gatefold vinyl box set. Whereas actually, some of the things that we've done, I think I've probably or tried to focus on my releases slightly less than some of the other things because we once we started to uncover some of the things that were maybe not being released, which is what we like to try and do. sometimes I was getting more excited about it than the end musical result of my own stuff. I would say my stuff, especially at the moment, doesn't necessarily need to have an album release as an endpoint. I mean, it's good to do that because it's a good thing to be able to connect with people that way. But that's not always what the ultimate endpoint of my stuff is. But sometimes there's music that would be just really good for more people to hear it, and that's basically what the ethos of what we try and do is.
Got it. Yeah. Well, I was wondering too how as your artistic sort of like voice changes to include things like visuals and particularly performance and installation, how that ends up getting supported by a label. That seems like there would be a point at which it would be difficult to wedge one into the other.
Yeah, I agree with you. It's something that I'm trying to think about as I go. I mean, the more performance stroke installation stroke art and inverted commas stuff has been more of my interest for the last couple of years. But what I've always tried to do is make sure that part of it is able to be released. Because in my head, I'm still at heart a musician. That's what I started doing, and that's still what I suppose. In a slightly shallow way, I still aspire to that. Everybody wants to have the record sleeve with their name on it or the cassette with your name on the spine. And for me, there's still something quite important about documenting it in that way. But it's definitely becoming increasingly difficult. I think everything that I've done has had a release of some kind once I've done it, but it's not always particularly true to it. Something that I did last year was I suppose it was a film piece which, as it played, generated the sound, which then degraded over time with me adjusting it, and it really worked best as a performance. And we released it as a release, but it was as a digital release with a piece of writing and a film, but that didn't really encapsulate what it was like to actually be there and to see it. So I am having to think about it a bit more. I'm lucky enough to have various different people, not just from our label, but the other people who I've worked with who are quite open to trying to do different things. But it is an interesting thing to try and do. There's a guy called Graham Dunning who manages to both be a musician, so he'll release records, but also the things that he does in person are very, very physical. And I'm quite impressed by the way that he marries the two things together. And that I'm trying to use that as a bit of a touchstone for how I can try and navigate what else is going to happen.
Sure. Okay, that makes sense. I was wondering if any of that had to do with sort of like the name alteration from Broken 20 to Broken 60, or if that's something else.
No, so the Broken 20, Broken 60 thing, we're actually, when it comes to things like, social media and marketing and things like that, we're reasonably good at it, but not very good at it. So Broken 20 is still the label, but Broken 60 is the cassette spin-off label. Now, why we've chosen to have a cassette sub-label, but not a sub-label for all the other formats we've put out, actually, I can't remember. There's,
right.
there's definitely a reason for it at the time. I think we thought we might do quite a lot more cassettes than we've done, but we're actually, the next release on the label, which is out tomorrow digitally, is coming out on cassette, and so we've kind of re-brought it back out. But that is the only difference. At the time we were doing it, like so many of these things, you think, oh, what aesthetically seems nice, without thinking of the fact that it's a marketing nightmare to change the name of your label part way through releasing things. So, yeah, it was a good.
Yeah, but I would also say that you're like the king of marketing nightmares. I mean, going from the name The Village Orchestra, and I'll tell you, when I think of something called the Village Orchestra, what I actually think of is like some kind of German Frankfurt band. Like the band picture would be like in a beer garden somewhere with people with lederhosen and tubas and stuff, right?
Yeah.
And so whoever waved you off of that name, good on them. I think that was probably a smart move. But I mean, the name change thing is something that you've had to embrace a little bit. But now you're starting to actually show up a little more under your own name as well. I noticed that in interviews, but also a lot in your installation work that's done under your name rather than TVO. Is that, in your mind, is that sort of how the things differentiate, or are you just like transitioning into just using your name?
It's a really difficult question because we're back to the not wanting to seem pretentious thing. For me, the hallmark of an artist losing it completely is when they stop using the nice artistic name they've been using for years and they go to their own first and second name. That's it. It's game over. That means that they consider themselves to be a serious artist, and I presume they wear berets and wear monocles, go to art openings, that kind of thing,
Oh,
and they've lost
Jesus.
touch with their roots. So it's just been the way that it's worked out. I remember, so for AAA in San Francisco this year, as was supposed to be happening, and then unfortunately it was cancelled. I was going to be presenting 44 as an installation at that, and I noticed that I'd been billed on the lineup because I was going to be giving a talk as well, which I was looking forward to, but was also very anxious about because that's totally out with my comfort zone. But I had been billed under my own name, whereas last year I performed at it, but I performed under my artistic name, and I did think to myself, is this it?
There's the big transition.
Yeah, it's been done for me. I didn't even realize. Yeah.
Oh, that's hilarious. Well, it's funny you say that because clearly, so I'm from the U.S. Midwest, and there's also this sort of thing. It's the land of farmers and Swedes, right? So it's mostly like, who do you think you are to talk about yourself, right? There's a heavy vein of that in the society here. So I totally understand where you're coming from on that. That's pretty hilarious. But moving on from the label to the further in thing, I think it's actually interesting that you pulled that together at a time that really needs it. I mean, I was unable to go to the Algorithmic Arts Assembly last year, but many of my coworkers at Cycling 74 did go and were blown away. Everybody came out of that saying, this is the most exciting thing we've been to in the whole year, right?
Yeah.
So people were really kind of deflated when, the virus comes along and we're not able to do that or, frankly, anything.
Yeah.
A lot of people that I've talked to are suffering almost depression from having, what was kind of a full and exciting performance schedule or whatever to nothing. The sort of like psychological hit that comes with that is pretty tough. And so what I've seen is like, 1.5 million people now, each doing their own live stream of whatever their thing is. And we're back to this thing of like, how do I even get attention for the thing that I'm doing?
Yeah.
And it seems like Further In has done that has garnered some attention by, first of all, again, not being self-focused, but being other-focused, which I think is really great. But also by kind of like really being broad in your perception of what it is that you're going to present.
This is exactly right. Obviously, I've been thinking about this. I've been thinking about the sort of broader philosophical issues of all of this as we've been doing it. So we've only been running it for 7 weeks. I would say the reason why it's doing well, and it is doing well, it's far exceeding my expectations in terms of how many people are actually watching it. It's because of the permanency of it, because it's not one stream that happens on a Wednesday afternoon at 3:00 and you watch it for an hour and then that's it gone. The fact that we have stuck to a schedule, at first people didn't really notice that because we didn't make a big deal about it. It's every Thursday, Friday and Saturday. But now 7 weeks on, we definitely have people who are watching not because of what's on, but because it's a Thursday night and they know that they will see something if they watch it. And that was exactly what the point of it was, because I didn't want it to become personality focused. The last thing I wanted was for it to be all about us, the people who are running it, and that was exactly how we set it up. And actually that goes back to what you said earlier on about how you can sort of let go of the process a little bit with a label. Well, in this case, I have let go even more, and even in the sense of, we haven't put on anything that I actually don't like. I would struggle to sort of commission something that I really, really didn't like at all or that didn't fit. But there's definitely things which I might not necessarily have watched myself, but which I still really think are worthwhile for the artist and for because there's an audience for it. And I think that's quite important, to try and take the ego out of it a little bit. So we've tried to be fairly broad with it. I think, there is resistance to the idea of streaming. I've seen a lot of interesting debate about this online, and Matt Dryhurst on Twitter has been the most sort of vocal person who has said that this isn't the right way to support the music industry. And I think he's right in that front. I agree with him on that. But I also think that there is something important for artists to feel that they are able to still have a platform for what they're doing. There's an element of catharsis about it. And if it means that people are sitting in their houses when they're not able to go out and do what they normally would, still wanting to create, but then thinking, well, what's the point of it? Well, we're giving them a point a little bit. Or if they have stopped working on something because they think, well, I'm not going to be able to screen this anymore, then again, hopefully this is an impetus to kind of keep working. And partially that was for my own benefit, because I had prepared an enormous amount of work for algorithmic art assembly this year, which then was just going to be left to the side. And I thought, no, I'm going to give myself a deadline to perform it on this channel. And that way I'm keeping myself disciplined about still, mentally disciplined, if you like, so not getting bogged down in a bit of unhappiness about it, and keeping to routine and all the rest of it. And I think that's quite important. It is amazing to me. It's so polarizing. A lot of the musicians, especially, who I've approached to say, hey, we're going to give you a free platform. We'll do all the work for you. You just need to sort of set up and play. Musicians especially are very suspicious of it. I'm not sure whether they think that streaming is an invalidation of the way that they want to do it. I know that there's certainly people who are used to performing in larger spaces with very bespoke, maybe speaker setups or screen setups, and they're very, very suspicious of it. And on the other side, it's the people who work in film and in installation who are not people who I was always really had that much of a connection to, who are saying, we have even before the lockdown, and whatever else, we had no opportunity to show some of this work.
There was no venue, right? Yeah.
And that blew my mind. And I was speaking to an artist called Amy Cutler last weekend, who performed as part of a AV duo, but we're also going to screen her films next week. And her exact words were, there is nowhere for me to screen these online apart from putting it up on YouTube, and it will just be lost in a sea of similar kinds of things. So even just simply having it screening through a day with a card up saying who it is that's screening it, that is more than we were able to get. So I'm feeling quite positive about that. How long we keep it going for is another matter, because it is an enormous amount of work, and I sort of hadn't thought about that. As usual with me, the idea comes first. So I jumped into it with both feet. Knew nothing about streaming software, about what sort of connect, even something as basic as what sort of fiber connection I need to have in my flat. All these kinds of things. Jumped into both feet to do it. We stuck it out. I will have to go back to my day job at some point in the future, but not for a while. So I'm looking at how far we continue it for. I've managed to find a small number of people who get very excited about doing it. We've managed to find a very large number of people who are very excited about watching it. But I need to kind of meet in the middle a little bit better there and get a broader range of people who will come in and perform or do streams or whatever. Sure. I'm quite excited. We've got some really interesting things. We've got dance performances coming up next week, which is something that's a bit different. You wouldn't see. I'm trying to think of what the equivalent might be, like a Boiler Room or Red Bull Music Academy.
Right.
They tend to be sort of single focused. I'm quite pleased that we can have a day where we've got a sound art piece, we've got some films, and we've got Buto dance later on in the evening. I think that's quite a nice lineup. And even we've got Torsten, who you mentioned before, is curating his second evening. He's done one already, where he's got two sort of Algorave musicians, but he's also got Tom Hall from Cycling 74 coming to do one of his show and tells, and that is exactly the sort of thing. If I'd had to write in advance what the sort of thing I wanted to do, this is exactly it. So you tune in for the music, but then you stay for the coding demonstration, or vice versa, or you come for the sound piece and then you see some dance that really interests you, and that was the whole point of it. Interesting juxtapositions.
Yeah, well, and again, that's one of those things where you're opening threads of inquiry for people that they might not otherwise know to follow.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, cool. So, unfortunately, Ruaridh, our time is just about up. But before I let you go, I'm curious, what is it that you have on your bench that you're working on now? I mean, you said you have a release coming out tomorrow on the label, but what other stuff have you got in the hopper, or is further in just like eating up so much of your time that you're focused on that?
I mean, there's an element of that. Actually, personally, the 44 Tarot, it still needs a little bit of work. I want there to be a web presence that's better than the one that there is at the moment. At the moment, there's a site which has the cards and the descriptions online. I'm going to break that down into separate pages for each card with the audio into it, so it becomes a bit more all-encompassing. So I want to kind of finish that off. But for my own thing, I've got a list of ideas, but I haven't started work on a number of them. There is one thing which is probably next on the list, which is a film about the city of Glasgow, about falling out of love with it and falling in love with it again, and a connection to a relationship. So I think that's probably next on the list, and that will be more almost like a straight film, not a narrative-driven film, a visually-driven film. But that's something that's a bit different again. But it's one of these things. It's been burning around my head for the last couple of years, and I think I'm going to probably make a start on that next. Label-wise, we have lots of stuff coming up. We've got lots of releases planned. We've got some CDs coming out soon, a tape's coming out tomorrow, and then further down the line, a couple more impractical ideas, but we'll wait and see if they happen. But yeah, Further In is definitely taking up the majority of my time at the moment, which is good. It's a good thing. I'm getting to see and hear music and visual things that I never would have done. But it's been nice having that as a thing to work on, to kind of distract me from what's going on outside the window, sort of thing.
Right on. Well, I thank you for putting the time in on that, because it definitely is worth it. I've run across some really neat stuff, checking out the streams that have been made available. So thank you for your work on that and for having this interview. It was great to get to know you and to kind of cast into some of the way that your brain works. I really appreciate it.
No problem. It was an absolute pleasure. It was good to speak to you.
All right. And with that, I'll let you have the rest of your day. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
All right, bye. So many thanks to Ruaridh for having the great discussion. Make sure you check in on Twitch TV. Check out the Further In virtual festival. It happens Thursdays, Fridays, and Saturdays. It's really worth checking out. I actually spent a lot of time there this weekend. My friend Tom Hall was doing a little show and tell of his performance rig. But it's just a great place to see DJs, experimental movies, dance, coding demonstrations, all kinds of stuff. It's really worth checking out. Another thing to check out, I'll just throw it out there, is next weekend on May 30th. I'll be doing a little workshop for the Music Hackspace, which is musichackspace.org. We're going to be doing kind of a beginner's workshop that talks about how do you use samples and kind of use and kind of screw them up inside of Macs without necessarily having to have a PhD. So it's a fun way to really quickly get into playing with samples on Macs. A lot of fun. If you're into it, check out musichackspace.org. Other than that, I'm going to let you go for the week. We'll catch you next time around. Thanks a lot. Bye.